You're crouched at the edge of a firelit cave, 40,000 years ago. The night smells of smoke and wet stone. You reach for a chipped flint, glance up at the shadows dancing on the wall, and something cold runs through you. You have done this before. Exactly this. The angle of the fire, the sound of the wind, the person beside you turning their head. Not something like it. This, and yet you know with total certainty that this moment is brand new. You have never sat here before, and you freeze. Your heart taps a little faster. Time seems to fold in half. That flicker has a name now. We call it déjà vu, and your Stone Age brain just did something deeply weird. So here's the question. Why does your brain hand you a memory of a moment that is happening for the very first time? Think about that for a second. Memory is supposed to be a record of the past. It is not supposed to tag the present as already seen. Yet, roughly 2 out of 3 people have felt this exact glitch. It arrives unannounced, lasts a few seconds, and vanishes before you can inspect it. You cannot summon it. You cannot point to what you supposedly remember. It is a feeling of pastness with no past attached. Ancient humans felt it around their fires. You feel it in a grocery store aisle or a hotel hallway. Same brain, same ghost. And for thousands of years, nobody could explain it. It's not one thing. It's never one thing. Déjà vu is not a haunting, and it is not a crack in the universe. It is several ordinary brain systems overlapping in one uncanny instant: memory, familiarity, and a quiet little fact checker you didn't know you had. We're going to walk through each layer from the word itself to a brain scan that flips the whole thing on its head. By the end, this creepy feeling is going to look less like a bug and more like a feature. Let's take it apart. Let's start with the word, because the word is younger than you think. For most of human history, this feeling had no label. Ancient people felt it. The wiring hasn't changed in 50,000 years, but they had no box to put it in. So it got folded into the supernatural. A visit from a past life. A message from the gods. A memory leaking out of a dream. When you cannot name a thing, you reach for magic. Then, in 1876, a French philosopher named Émile Boirac finally gave it a name. He used a plain French phrase, déjà vu. It means simply already seen. No ghosts, no prophecy. Just 2 ordinary words describing a moment that feels used. Here's the thing nobody tells you. Naming it did not make it rare. It made it measurable. And when researchers started counting, the numbers were stunning. Roughly 60 to 70% of people report experiencing déjà vu at least once. In many surveys, close to 2/3 report it as a regular visitor. This is not a fringe experience at all. It is one of the most common weird things the human brain does. There's a pattern hiding in the data too. Déjà vu peaks between the ages of 15 and 25, then slowly fades for the rest of your life. Teenagers get it the most. Your grandparents get it the least. Hold on to that fact. It's a clue we'll come back to, and it points somewhere genuinely surprising. One more oddity from the surveys. People who travel more report more déjà vu. People who remember their dreams report more. People with more education report more. Which is a very funny sentence because it makes déjà vu sound like a frequent flyer perk. It isn't. More new places just means more chances for your brain to trip over its own filing system. So that's the surface. To explain it, we have to go inside the skull, into a curl of tissue behind your ear that decides what counts as a memory. Meet the part of your brain doing all this. The medial temporal lobe. It sits deep behind each temple, tucked inside a seahorse-shaped structure called the hippocampus. If your brain were a library, the hippocampus would be the librarian who decides which experiences get filed as memories and where they go. Right next to it sits another region, the rhinal cortex, whose job is subtler. It doesn't store the full story of an event. It just raises a small flag that says, familiar. Seen it before, move along. That flag matters more than you'd expect. Here's how we know these regions are involved. For decades, neurologists noticed something striking in patients with temporal lobe epilepsy. Right before certain seizures begin, many of them feel an intense wave of déjà vu. It's part of what doctors call the aura, the warning that a seizure is starting deep in the temporal lobe. And here is the part that turns a hunch into evidence. In studies, surgeons placed electrodes deep in the medial temporal lobe and passed a tiny current through it, and patients reported vivid déjà vu on the spot. Stimulate that patch of tissue, and the feeling appears on demand. And that's not a metaphor. That's a real sensation generated by a jolt of electricity in a specific curl of the brain. Sit with what that means. Déjà vu isn't floating in some mystical ether. It lives in an address you can point to. It's a signal, and the signal can misfire. Now, one giant caveat, because I don't want to scare anyone. The vast majority of déjà vu has nothing to do with epilepsy. Healthy brains do this constantly. The epilepsy cases just gave scientists a window, a place where the feeling was frequent and predictable enough to study. It's like learning how an engine works by studying the ones that backfire. The backfire is dramatic, but it tells you about the ordinary engine too. So the temporal lobe is the stage. The hippocampus is the librarian. The rhinal cortex is the little familiarity flag. Keep that flag in mind, because in the next layer, it goes up at the wrong moment. So how does the familiarity flag get raised by mistake? To answer that, you need to know your memory runs on two separate tracks. Track 1 is recollection. That's when you remember the actual thing, the where, the when, the story. You see an old friend, and the whole file opens. Their name, the summer you met, the terrible haircut you both had. Recollection comes with details. Track 2 is familiarity, a thinner signal. It's the feeling of, I know this, without any of the supporting facts. You've had it in real life. You pass someone on the street, you're certain you know them, but you cannot place them for the life of you. Same face, no file. Familiarity, running without recollection. Now here's the leading theory of déjà vu, and it's beautifully simple. Déjà vu is familiarity firing without recollection, but aimed at the present moment. Your rhinal cortex throws up the seen it flag, but your hippocampus, the librarian, comes back with nothing. No matching memory, no file. So you're left holding a contradiction, a scene that feels intensely known and completely new at the same time. That clash is the eerie feeling. That's déjà vu. Why would the flag go up for a brand new scene? Because your brain matches on patterns, not on perfect copies. If a new place shares enough of its underlying shape with something you've seen before, the layout, the arrangement, the vibe, the familiarity system can fire even though the specific memory is buried or was never really formed. The librarian can't find the book, but the alarm still rings. Picture your ancient self again, stepping into an unfamiliar cave. The curve of the wall, the position of the fire, the shape of the entrance. Maybe it echoes a cave from a season ago, one you barely registered. Your brain shrugs and says, familiar. But it can't tell you why. To a Stone Age mind with no word for any of this, that would feel like magic, or memory, or a message. To us, it's just two memory systems briefly out of sync, which raises an obvious question. If it really is about the shape of a place, could you build a room to trigger déjà vu on purpose? Somebody did exactly that. Her name is Anne Cleary, a cognitive psychologist at Colorado State University. And in 2012, she did something clever. She decided to manufacture déjà vu in a lab using, of all things, the video game The Sims. Cleary and her team built virtual scenes, a garden and a bowling alley, then a junkyard and a hedge maze, all rendered inside the game. Then they built second scenes that looked totally different on the surface, but shared the exact same spatial layout. Same distances, same corners, same arrangement of objects, just dressed up with different textures and themes. A courtyard. And a junkyard that were secretly the same floor plan. Participants toured the first set of scenes in virtual reality. Later they walked through the new scenes, the ones with matching skeletons, but different skins. And again, people reported déjà vu right at the moment they entered a space that secretly mirrored one they'd seen before. They couldn't consciously recall the earlier scene at all. The resemblance was hidden, but their brains felt the echo anyway. This is the Gestalt familiarity hypothesis, and Cleary's virtual déjà vu nailed it down. It's the shape of a place, the overall configuration, that trips the wire. You walk into a hotel lobby you've never seen, but the spacing of the pillars and the sweep of the staircase match a lobby from years ago that you never bothered to store. Your familiarity system lights up, your recollection system stays dark. And there it is. The sudden little shiver. I love this experiment for one nerdy reason. For centuries, déjà vu was untouchable, too fleeting, and too random to study. You can't schedule a ghost. So Cleary said, "Fine, I'll build the haunted house myself." She turned an unpredictable flash into something she could summon in a controlled room, over and over again in hundreds of people. And the stronger the spatial resemblance between the new scene and the buried old one, the stronger the déjà vu that people reported. That's not vibes. That's a real dose-response curve. But Cleary wasn't done because déjà vu doesn't just feel like a memory. For a lot of people, it feels like you can see what's about to happen next. Ask around and you'll hear it said constantly. When I get déjà vu, I feel like I know what's coming next. It feels just like a flash of prophecy. Like the moment is a rerun and you've already seen the ending. So Cleary tested that too. In a 2018 study with nearly 300 participants, she ran the same virtual scene trick, but this time stopped the walkthrough at a key moment and asked people, "What happens next? Can you predict the next turn?" The people feeling déjà vu were absolutely convinced they could. The sense of prediction was strong and real. But when she checked their actual answers, they were no more accurate than random guessing. Zero predictive power. They felt the future and hit nothing. Sit with that. The premonition is real as a feeling and completely empty as information. Your brain generates a powerful sense of knowing, and that sense is pointing at absolutely nothing. As Cleary put it, it may feel like a premonition, but it's just a feeling. So where does the fake fortune-telling come from? Probably the same familiarity signal, wearing a different mask. When a scene feels intensely familiar, your brain assumes you must know how it unfolds, because normally familiar things are things you've actually lived through. So it projects that confidence forward. You've been here, so you know what's next. But you haven't been here. The familiarity was a false alarm. And the prediction is that same false alarm aimed at the future instead of the past. This is the part that quietly really matters. Every spooky story about déjà vu, past lives, parallel timelines, glimpses of destiny, leans on that feeling of knowing the future. And the feeling is a card trick your own brain is playing on you. Here's a small humbling thought. Your certainty is not a truth detector. Your brain can hand you total confidence about a memory that never happened and a future it cannot see. Déjà vu is the rare moment you catch it red-handed. Which brings us back to that clue from earlier, the one about teenagers getting it most and the elderly getting it least. Because the reason it fades is the opposite of what you'd guess. You'd assume déjà vu fades with age because memory fades with age. Older brain, worse memory, fewer weird memory glitches. Reasonable, and probably wrong. Here's the leading idea, a lovely twist. Déjà vu may not be a failure of memory at all. It may be your brain catching a memory error in real time. Remember the contradiction, the seen it flag firing while the librarian finds nothing? Something in your head notices that mismatch and flags the conflict. It says, hold on, that doesn't add up. The uneasy feeling of déjà vu might be the sensation of your brain fact-checking itself, catching a little glitch in the act. If that's true, then déjà vu isn't a sign of a broken memory. It's a sign of a memory system alert enough to notice its own mistakes. And that reframes the whole age pattern completely. Young brains are sharp fact-checkers, quick to flag the mismatch, so teenagers end up feeling déjà vu constantly. As we age, that error monitoring gets a little slower and more forgiving. The mismatch slips by uncaught. You get less déjà vu not because memory got better, but because the internal auditor stopped raising its hand. Think of a young, over-caffeinated proofreader who circles every typo on the page. That's a teenage brain. Decades later, the same proofreader is calmer and tired and lets a few typos slide. Fewer red circles, fewer flags. And so, fewer little jolts of déjà vu. The feeling didn't leave because your mind decayed. It left because your inner critic mellowed out. That's a genuinely strange inversion. The thing that feels like a machine glitch might actually be the machine's quality control light blinking on. But if déjà vu really is your brain auditing itself, we should be able to look inside a living skull and watch it happen. So one research team went ahead and did. Now let's be honest about the limits here. Science does not have déjà vu fully solved, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. There are competing theories, and they probably all capture a piece of it. Some déjà vu may come from that spatial layout familiarity Cleary found. Some may come from split-second timing errors, one signal reaching awareness a beat late, and the brain reads the delay as again. Some may be tied to tiny, harmless hiccups in the temporal lobe. And there is a real exception worth naming. For a small number of people, déjà vu is not a fun quirk. In temporal lobe epilepsy, it can arrive many times a day as a seizure aura. There's also a rarer, sadder condition, sometimes called déjà vécu, seen in some older patients, where the sense of already living this becomes constant and distressing. People insist they've read the newspaper before, met the doctor before, lived this exact day before. That's the same machinery we've been describing, stuck in the on position. It's a reminder that this delicate memory checking system is a gift, precisely because it usually just stays very quiet. There's one last thing I saved for the end, and it quietly rearranges everything. In 2016, a cognitive neuroscientist named Akira O'Connor and his team at St. Andrews did something almost nobody had managed before them. They triggered déjà vu in volunteers while those volunteers lay inside a brain scanner so they could watch, live, which regions lit up during the feeling. Everyone expected the memory regions to fire, the hippocampus, the temporal lobe, the usual suspects. That's the whole memory glitch story. But that is not mainly what they saw. The areas that lit up most were at the front of the brain, regions like the prefrontal cortex involved in decision-making, conflict monitoring, and error checking. The parts of your brain whose job is to double-check the rest of your brain. Read that again. During déjà vu, the loudest activity wasn't memory misfiring. It was the brain's fact checker switching on, catching the false seen it signal, holding it up and saying, essentially, that's not right. The uneasy feeling isn't the error, it's the correction. Here's the quotable version, and it's worth carrying with you. Déjà vu may not be your memory failing. It may be your memory working and catching itself in the act. That flips 300 years of spooky stories. The feeling everyone treated as a haunting, a glitch, a crack in reality, looks instead like a sign of a healthy, vigilant mind auditing its own records. Your ancient ancestor, frozen by the fire, wasn't glimpsing a past life. Their brain was doing quality control. And so is yours. So let's pull the camera all the way back. Back past the brain scanner, past the lab, past the word Boirac gave us in 1876, all the way to that fire-lit cave and the version of you crouched inside it. The wind shifts, the shadows jump, and that cold flicker runs down your spine, and for 1 second, the world feels like a rerun. But it isn't, and it never really was. It's a 50,000-year-old brain doing exactly what it was built to do, sorting the new from the old, the real from the false, and every so often it catches itself mid-thought. The same jolt your ancestors felt by the fire, you'll feel in a stairwell tomorrow. Same ghost, same machinery. You haven't been here before. But isn't it wonderful that some part of you insists you have? Next time your brain glitches like this, remember who's really watching. You, fact-checking yourself.